today because it's such a vast subject, and I've done other talks before, and so what I decided to do is I sent out to a whole heap of sort of Facebook friends, you know, if you had one question to ask about medical cannabis, what would it be? And I got some really interesting replies back, so I'll base my talk around that. But first of all, I'd like to know in the audience who pretty much knows nothing about cannabis and medical cannabis. Okay, so everybody here has got a sort of a bit of a working knowledge of things like THC and CBD and things like that. How many know the difference between THC and CBD? Okay, so there's a bit of a starting point. And actually that was one of the first questions I got was, what's the difference between cannabis oil and hemp oil? Well, it's all hemp, I suppose. Cannabis sativa has been called hemp. But so very, very briefly, there are three main species that we talk about: cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. Ruderalis is a poor weedy little thing that lives in Russia and doesn't get much sort of play, so we'll concentrate on the other two. Sativas was actually the first cultivated hemp. So it's changed now because of all the hybridisation, but technically sativa is the industrial hemp and indica was the medical hemp. But all of that has changed now since the recreational smokers sort of started hybridising back in the 70s. All of that is now blurred. And a lot of people will talk about, oh, that's a sativa and that's an indica and whatever. It's a lot simpler to talk about sativa and indica traits. So some cannabis will make you more energetic and you'll laugh a lot and you'll get things done, and that's more the sativa traits. Other cannabis will knock you out, you know, you'll sort of have to go to sleep and all of that. That's indica traits. Indica traits are considered slightly better for pain relief and muscle relaxation, while the sativa traits are better known to help you function during the day and make things a little easier for you. So I won't talk any more about that because that, of course, is a talk in itself. So the difference between hemp oil and cannabis oil in this day and age is that cannabis is the medicinal one and hemp is the industrial one, so hemp we use for things like textiles, building materials, fuel, food, all of that we call hemp, and the rest of it we call cannabis. That's medicinal or recreational, we call it cannabis. The one thing we don't call it is marijuana. That's a term that was introduced in America during the days of getting it prohibited, and we consider that that's actually sort of a made-up name, and we try and avoid its use altogether. So if you get a funny look by saying, you say to someone marijuana, that's why. It's cannabis, or if you're talking about an industrial, it's hemp. And those two words cover pretty much everything. Okay, the next question, of course, was the difference between THC and CBD. So very briefly, THC is the psychoactive component, and that's what makes you stoned. CBD is not found in as great a quantity in the plant. It's a much smaller amount found in the plant. And that's the one that's considered not psychoactive and is the one that gives the neuroprotection. Another question that I was asked is, what's the difference between street cannabis and medical cannabis? There is a world of difference. So back in the 70s, and just to digress a moment, I've been asked to sort of say, okay, I started smoking cannabis when I was 16. I found that drinking alcohol made me feel sick and I didn't like the way it made me act. And I found that cannabis smoking enabled me to appreciate music more, it enabled me to appreciate nature more, and I just generally felt like I was a nicer person smoking cannabis than drinking alcohol. And then probably it wasn't until my 20s that I sort of realised that I was actually starting to use cannabis medicinally rather than recreationally, for things like to help with migraine, to help with sleep, because, being an ADD brain type, I can be on the go a lot. So cannabis is very good for quieting down the brain in that instance. And so, you know, the line is very grey between what is recreational and what is medicinal. But it's not so grey between the difference between street cannabis and medicinal cannabis. There are lots of wonderful growers out there who are very ethical. But in the 90s, the cannabis market was pretty much overtaken by organised crime. And they grew it all indoors. And basically they tried to drive up the concentration of THC in order to basically try and make people addicted. And so in doing so, when you drive up the THC in the plant, you actually reduce the amount of CBD. And if you have an unopposed cannabinoid like THC, which does not have a little bit of CBD there with it, you can get symptoms like paranoia and anxiety, and you will get a higher rate of drug-induced psychosis. And you will get a withdrawal syndrome associated with it. This is not what you find in nature. This is what's been manufactured by people just wanting to make money. So the government's, this rabid desire that the government has to prevent diversion to the streets of medical cannabis is yet again another stupid decision by the government, because the best thing that could happen is for the streets to be flooded with medical cannabis and to drive the organised crime people out of business so that they're no longer interested. So that's the difference between street and medicinal cannabis. So at this point, we're looking at the very basics of things. Are there any questions? I think a hand went up there. I can't see. Okay, no questions. We'll keep going. So obviously you're a fairly well-informed bunch here. Let me know if I'm going on about something that you all know about as well. Okay, so now what was the next thing? Oh, yes. The other big one, of course, is that cannabis is being sort of said, oh, well, it will trigger schizophrenia. That's a big one. Well, there's been a lot of research done with that, and certainly it is capable of triggering a psychotic episode. And in those with the genetic tendency to schizophrenia, it may trigger a first episode of schizophrenia. But just to put it into sort of perspective, of greater, something that causes more first episodes of schizophrenia than medical cannabis is actually the first year at university. So when you're having a look at what's causing what, let's just say that you have a genetic predisposition to having that particular mental illness, schizophrenia, and that during your life, especially during adolescence and early adulthood, you will come across triggers that may or may not trigger that schizophrenia. It is not a causation, it's just a correlation, if that makes sense to people. So the next thing, of course, it's a gateway drug. And this is another one that's been actually pretty much debunked now. Yes, certainly, a lot of, most of those who went on to heroin or cocaine or crystal meth started with cannabis. But, how were they exposed to these other drugs? The way they were exposed to them was because they had to get their cannabis from the same people that sell heroin and crystal meth and all of these other chemical drugs. So it's a very easy step off. There's no cannabis there, well, let's just have this one. And so it's more a gateway drug by association rather than it makes you take these other drugs. And there's now more evidence to say that it's an exit drug rather than a gateway drug. One of the other things I did was to print off a lot of the articles from the links I'd saved from my phone. And I was surprised just in that little bit there. There's articles where they're now using cannabis to help you come off crystal meth. They're now using cannabis to help you come off opioids. So rather than being a gateway drug, it's now considered an exit drug. So that's another sort of myth that we can debunk. And the other one, there was one other myth. Oh, of course, yes, it's addictive. Now, how many of you here in this audience think that cannabis is an addictive drug? Okay, you are well informed. There's not too many here. And, you know, if someone has a really strong genetic predisposition to addiction, they can become addicted to cannabis. It would more likely be a psychological addiction because there really is not a great deal of evidence for physical addiction. About the only withdrawal things that people seem to get from it is sleep disturbance. But other than that, I have another paper, and I'm going to leave these papers here for people to peruse and if they want to write down links from them and stuff. But there's also another paper here looking at how addictive cannabis is compared to almost anything else on earth. And it just scores so lowly compared to things like coffee, nicotine, alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine, and it goes on and on and on. So really the answer's got to be that cannabis in general is not an addictive drug. Any other questions about the whole addiction side of it?
I've got a question about mental illness. We're talking about schizophrenia.
Yep.
What about other mental illnesses like bipolar?
What's becoming quite clear is that cannabis has a place in therapy for many, many mental illnesses. In bipolar, it honestly seems to work quite well as a mood balancer, and it also seems to help prevent the psychosis that can occasionally go along with bipolar. Other brain types. I like to talk in brain types rather than disorders. I'm an ADD brain type. I don't really think I have a disorder because I have attention deficit disorder, or as they coin it. So I just like to say I've got an ADD brain type. And the problem, of course, with people with attention deficit is they either can't focus at all or they hyper-focus. And cannabis is a great balancer for that. It helps you focus, but it also helps to distract you when you need to be distracted. I think, and so the ADD brain type, of course, overlaps with autism spectrum, Asperger's, spectrum disorder. And there are now just so many studies coming out to show that it can be helpful with autism. The interesting thing, though, is that, especially when we're talking about children, there's this whole big thing about using THC because it's psychoactive. And that, CBD is the way to go. Well, it seems to be a bit of a trend now that the autistic children are responding better to acid THC and THC rather than just CBD. And an interesting thing is that, and this was one of the questions of someone who has an autistic child, and she wanted to know, would cannabis make a difference with him being non-verbal? Could cannabis make him speak? And there's actually papers out there and there's research to show that, yeah, it can. Cannabis can actually help remove some of that non-verbal stuff from autistic children, and they actually can communicate better. So there's a place for cannabis with autism spectrum disorder as well. I don't know, depression, anxiety. It has certainly been effective. I think that, I don't know if there's a recreational smoker in the world that hasn't occasionally had a toke because they're depressed or anxious. And, the vast majority of times it makes you feel better. So I think there's also quite a few people that they were given the choice between an antidepressant and taking cannabis for their anxiety and depression, which one they'd choose. Which one would you guys choose? If you had a choice between a chemical drug to take for your depression or cannabis, which would you choose? Absolutely. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer, you know, like, because it's never going to kill you. Okay, so what else have we got? Any other questions? Like, I don't mind being... Oh, yep.
You haven't mentioned THC and THCA and how...
Okay, as I was saying that, I thought, oh my God, I haven't said what acid THC is. Okay, so in the plant, we have lots of different substances. And in cannabis, the main ones are the cannabinoids. And we've talked about THC and CBD, but there's also lots of other ones. And in the plant, THC is not in its delta-9 form, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, yeah, it's not in that form, it's in the acid form. So in order for THC to become active, you actually have to knock off that acid group, which is the carboxyl group. And the easiest way to do that is with heat. So, I think probably you've heard of people talking about decarbing and decarboxylation. Well, that's basically what that means, is that you cleave off that carboxyl group with heat and you're left with the active form. But there are many proponents to juicing raw cannabis, to just using acid THC, especially for children. And it's certainly known that acid THC also has its health benefits. And the one thing it does do, of course, is that it helps you add variety to your medicine too, so that you're not only along with the acid THC, if you're using a different strain, you'll get lots of other cannabinoids as well. Now, to date, there are over 140 different cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And then you've got other constituents that also have health benefits, like the terpenes and the flavonoids, which are what give the cannabis its smell. Terpenes also can give, well, flavonoids are a type of terpenes, so I won't go into the phytochemistry because I'm only learning that myself at the moment, and you know, if I'm confused, I'm sure you guys will be too. But let's just say that it's not just the cannabinoids. There's lots and lots of things in it. Which leads me to another question, which was, you know, sort of why is it better than the chemical drugs that the pharmaceutical companies will give you? I don't know, would someone in the audience like to attempt to answer that? Why is cannabis better than a chemical drug? It's natural? Sorry, what was that? Yep. So that's two reasons. It's natural. It responds to us well because we have an endocannabinoid system, which, so, you know, these substances in cannabis are actually designed to act on those receptors. But going back to the natural thing, it's because it's a whole plant. And, I mean, when I first started looking, you know, at cannabis medicine, I mean, when I was actually sort of dying of stage 4D melanoma, you know, there's not a great deal you can sort of do because you're so crook. So I researched cannabis medicine and I learned how to grow herbs. And it was just like, it just opened my eyes to so many things talking about cannabis medicine. And, now I've lost my train of thought and I can't blame, you know, I'm actually not stoned, I can't blame it on that. So we were talking about the whole plant. That's right. Okay, so, and I learned about this thing called the entourage effect, which is that, you know, basically as soon as you isolate a substance out of the plant, you actually take away all the other things that the other constituents do. And so I'm thinking, you know, oh wow, you know, this is great, this entourage effect. And then I started studying my herbal medicine and realised that, of course, plant synergy is what herbal medicine is based on. It's not just cannabis. It's, you know, every medicinal herb that we have. The way that we make herbal medicine work so well is because we use the entourage effect. We use plant synergy. And so the reason you don't get the side effects that you can get with pharmaceutical products is because in their zeal to get these active constituents and isolate them, you know, they've completely forgotten that the other substances are there to protect you from those side effects. The other substances are there to help the plant work better. There are other herbs that you can put with it to create a synergistic effect, which means that it works even better than just, each of them on their own. And so, back just to sort of philosophise for a minute, over 100 years ago, when the Flexnell report basically caused all the natural medicine colleges to close down, and the only colleges that got funding were those that agreed to use the drug therapy provided by the chemical companies. What a horrible thing to realise is that our medical education has been run by Big Pharma for over 100 years. So no wonder none of us know what herbal medicine can do. And I mean, I didn't have as many scales to fall from my eyes as a lot of doctors. But, the depth of my disillusion and betrayal in the medical establishment is just extreme. I mean, to realise that in the 1980s they discovered a whole new neurotransmitter system, the endocannabinoid system. It was the medical discovery of the decade. And yet doctors knew nothing about it. And we weren't taught anything about it. What a betrayal that is, And so, when people bag doctors because they don't want to prescribe cannabis or this or that, just remember that, they really have been brainwashed. And it takes a lot to get over being brainwashed. And also the other little thing that people, aren't really aware of is that none of these doctors will be indemnified for prescribing medical cannabis. Their insurers won't insure them. I don't think there'd be too many complaints about it. We're certainly not going to kill anyone with it. But, and also there's no education. They're so brainwashed and they're so sheep-like that, they're waiting to get their instructions on what to do, and those instructions are just not forthcoming. So, I mean, you can abuse the higher echelon doctors all you like, but the average doctor at the coalface, I think people bag them a bit, and, it would be a very difficult position to be in this climate, where we are with medical cannabis legislation. Okay, there's more questions. Is this okay? Is everyone happy with how we're going? And okay.
Can I have a question?
Oh, yeah.
So, trying to get any prescription in the hospital?
Yes, pretty much. Okay, so these were some other questions. Where were they? The political ones, I think. Yeah, I had a couple of people ask, why is the government so opposed to it? So basically, why is the government so opposed to it? I mean, we can answer that in one word. Oh, well, two words in a way. Big pharma. This government, as soon as it was in the wind that it looked like they might have to do something about the cannabis legislation, basically made deals with pharmaceutical companies. And this especially is the problem in Queensland, is that Queensland Health has made a deal with GW Pharmaceutics. And these poor, mums have been told categorically that they will not prescribe any other cannabis in Queensland except for Epidiolex, which is a semi-synthetic CBD product.
See, that's ridiculous, isn't it, Deb?
Yes.
Because it's an isolated cannabinoid and it doesn't work as well as a full plant.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And so this is what we're facing. We're basically facing a bunch of narcissistic sociopaths that run medicine in Australia. We're looking at from the medical boards to the state hospitals to the AMA, and, in actual fact, a lot of people say, yes?
The QNU as well.
QNU, yep.
Nurses are really being railroaded.
Yeah, yep. And so... Yep. I know, it's Belinda. Hi, Belinda. Always catch up with old friends here. Not at all. No, this talk, I really honestly just wanted it to be fairly interactive and for people to interrupt, and because it's really a bit like a frequently asked questions thing, if you know what I mean.
Well, Deb, can I interrupt then?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to tell you a fun fact. Fun fact. Have you ever been in a hospital and had a drip put into your arm? Hey? Now, the fun fact is, next time, tell the nurses and doctors that the guy that invented the drip His name is William O'Shaughnessy. You know William O'Shaughnessy.
Oh, okay.
And he's the guy, you know, he's the big European guy that just discovered cannabis in the 1800s. I know that's been around for thousands of years, but in the 1800s, he's the guy that invented the drip and also stopped a baby from having seizures.
Seizures.
So, fun fact, next time you're in hospital.
Thanks, Sista. So, yes? Really good question. Now, I don't have sort of any research with me. Most of the other things that I'm talking about, I've got some papers here that people can just have a quick look at, and as I say, if they want to, you know, write down a link from it or something, you know, because I'm just not computer enough savvy to have like multiple USB sticks to hand out and stuff. So Alzheimer's, yeah, look, when you look at how CBD works and THC works and everything, you can extrapolate a little bit. So you would imagine for Alzheimer's that CBD would be the most important component. Apart from elderly people probably having a little bit of trouble coping with being off their tits on cannabis, CBD would be the better one to do. And then you see, what you can do is just you start with the CBD only product, or, well, I don't like anything unopposed, so hopefully it's got just a touch of acid THC in it. And you start with that CBD, and then you work out the response. For example, if you think a more sedative effect is required, you might want to add in some THC at night. But it looks like, from the little I've read, is that the CBD treatment has a definite effect on sundowning, which I don't know if any of you, all of you have know what sundowning is. Yeah, it's when people with dementia, they tend to get very agitated and sort of funny at around sunset. And often that's when their antipsychotics are given to them. And I mean, if you think, they're giving elderly people risperidone, Largactil, you know, Zyprexa, all of these really massive antipsychotic drugs, and heaps of benzos, you know, like Valium and Seropax and stuff like that, when they could just so easily be giving them a cannabis mixture that will do no harm, you know, and you know, it's sort of free to be more themselves, you know, so it's very promising in Alzheimer's. And now I think there was a question from this area here, the second row. You've given up on it?
Can I just clarify that on the Alzheimer's?
Yep.
My mother's almost 90 and she has a bit of THC and the CBD, but are you saying she needs the THCA as well?
It really doesn't matter in some ways. This is also the wonderful thing with cannabis medicine. Even though it's, you know, very individualised, there's a lot of room for error, if you know what I mean. The reason for adding extra acid THC would simply be to try and cut down the psychoactive effect if the patient finds it unpleasant. And, of course, with the little that we know now, there may be other benefits to using acid THC as well. But it is a way of cutting down how psychoactive it is. And CBD also does that too. CBD will attenuate the stone that you get with THC. And especially for cancer regimes, which can be very rugged, one-to-one, high-dose regimes, using some of that as acid THC and some as CBD will just help them function a little bit better because they're not so psychoactively affected. So does that answer your question? So it doesn't really matter. What you will find is a ratio that works best. Yeah, and you can tweak it as much as you like. You're not going to hurt anybody.
Adverse drug interactions.
So that was another question that was in here about adverse reactions. And interestingly, the question that I got most, which I thought it would be where can you get it from, actually, was what are the long-term effects?
No, I mean if you're on other medication.
Yep. So basically, there is not a lot of potential for interaction, though THC especially is, there's very few things that it interacts with. However, the CBD is actually processed by one of the enzyme systems in the liver. So theoretically, it could either increase or decrease some of those medications that are also processed by that same enzyme system. But in real terms, we're not seeing any significant interactions to date. And I won't say they're not, but at the moment, it's pretty safe to take with most things. Did that answer your question? If it's look, and as my husband will concur, I never use 5 words when 50 will do. So if I get a little complicated for you, just tell me to, back up and explain a little bit more clearly. I get very enthusiastic and carried away. So anything that needs to be...
Would be increased.
Sorry?
Which type of medication are you talking about?
For a good example, and probably Andrew Catalaris would talk to you better about this, is, the drugs used for epilepsy, especially in children. So, there is a potential for interaction, and don't ask me which ones because I don't know, but it's easy enough to Google. And so, and it depends on whether it causes the enzyme to work better or worse as to whether the effect will be increased or decreased. So you have to do it on a drug-by-drug basis and have a look at what enzyme systems are used to metabolise it in the liver. Also, there is theoretically you can avoid the interaction with CBD by not having it orally, by having it so that it goes through the skin or under your tongue or something like that, so it doesn't go through the liver first. But that's getting into more difficult things like first-pass metabolism and stuff like that. Just to let you know why edibles work better or seem to get more stoned and more couch lock type stoned from edibles is because when you ingest cannabis, the first metabolite is another, I think it's 11 delta hydrocannabinol. I'm sure someone can correct me on that in here. And basically it's even more psychoactive and sedative than delta 9 THC. So that's a very simple explanation as to why people can get really, really stoned from ingesting oil. Okay, let's see what I have. How are we going for time?
Can I ask a question? Sorry?
Yeah, sure.
Smoking cannabis straight, does that damage your lungs at all?
Another question in here. See, everyone's thinking the same. Okay, because, there's actually research out there now for the use of cannabis in COPD or COAD, chronic obstructive airways disease. So if you smoke cannabis, yes, you are certainly getting tars and you're getting all those residuals from that burnt plant matter. So, yes, it's always going to be better to vaporise rather than smoke. But it's not the worst thing you can smoke either. The terrible sort of additives in nicotine make it far more dangerous to smoke, even though cannabis might have more tar in it than nicotine and might have more other things in it. It also contains things in it that are protective to your lungs. So it's a little bit of a balancing out thing. So interestingly, and you can draw your own conclusions, but I'm a terrible cigarette smoker, even though I'm a doctor and all this sort of stuff, have been, since I was 16 as well. And yet I have virtually no damage in my lungs from smoking. And, for someone who has a CT scan every 3, 4, 5 months to check on melanoma, believe you me, we'd know. And so I just think it's an interesting observation that I have been, 20 to 30 cigarette a day person since I was 16. I've also smoked cannabis since I was 16, and I have no COAD. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Yes?
What about when it comes to cancer, like CBD and THC?
Oh God. Okay. Well, that was my first talk here. It was on cannabis and cancer, but I'll just review it very quickly because this is a whole other topic on its own. Okay, so There's been a question, actually, I'll just add this in while I think about it, that a lot of people have been querying as to whether THC is contraindicated when you have breast cancer, especially estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer. Now, does everybody understand what I mean by that? By estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer? Okay, it's just that it's so common, you sort of think everybody knows about it now. But basically, there's a few different types of breast cancer, and the ones that we call estrogen receptor-positive, it means that estrogen will stimulate the growth of those cancers. So that's why they get put on things like tamoxifen, which is like an anti-estrogen drug, which will protect the breast and stop the estrogen from attaching to the receptors in the breast and thereby prevent cancer. Mind you, black cohosh can do the same thing. So you don't really need tamoxifen and increase your risk of endometrial cancer. So there's that part of it. Okay, so just generally speaking though, with cancer, so my message to you today is THC is safe with breast cancer, no matter what receptor positivity it's got. So I hope that answers any queries that were out there. So cancer in general, basically you are best if you use both THC and CBD, and we started in a 1-to-1 ratio with high doses. Now, it works by various mechanisms. It works by causing apoptosis, which is a lovely word which was actually discovered by a pathologist in Brisbane a couple of generations ago, and it's programmed cell death. And that's why we die, is because we have programmed cell death, and that's why cancers grow, because they don't. So THC and CBD, I won't differentiate between the two. They do different things, but for our purposes today, just THC and CBD, they cause apoptosis of cancer cells. They prevent the growing of new blood vessels that feed the cancer. They prevent adhesion molecules from working, so the cancer doesn't attach to other cells and go spreading other places. And they stop the adhesion of those cancer cells to where they settle to become a secondary. And there could be more as well. I think there's one I've left out. But that gives you a general idea, is that, you know, not only are we just saying, oh, you know, it will work for cancer, but there is a wealth of research out there showing just how cannabis kills cancer cells. Now, okay, this is the understanding of the basic chemistry. THCA and THC are part and parcel of the same thing. The best way to look at it, and you can get CBDA acid as well. So what you think about it is that in the plant, it's in an inactive form because the plant doesn't want it to be activated yet for whatever reason. But when we ingest it or heat it, in the case of cannabis, it becomes activated. So the acid forms of all of them are the pro-drug, if that makes sense, and then it gets converted into the active form which acts on the body. So they're all the same thing, one's in an inactive form and one's in an active form. Does that make sense? Okay. Right, so let's see, how are we going for time? Yeah, I thought I'd been talking for a while. As Michael said, I can talk all day. So I'll just have a look through and see what I've missed here. Let's see. Oh, types of side effects. Okay, so I'll hand this over to the audience. What sort of side effects do you think you get? Happy, healthy and hungry. Geez, how toxic are they? No, we want some bad adverse effects. Come on, there are some. And we could go on to another letter of the alphabet as well. Okay, so happy, healthy, hungry, horny. Yeah, we're doing well here on adverse effects, and, you know, maybe I should just rest the case here. Yeah, like, obviously, overdosing on cannabis is not pleasant. We've all done it, And I mean, you know, I have to test products at times, and my husband will tell you that I've overestimated a few times and have been completely knocked out for a day and a half. So there are adverse effects. It can make you paranoid and anxious. It can basically just knock you out and make you non-functional. And, you know, but obviously we're not big grown-up adults and we can't decide when or when not to drive like that. Fuck. So, you know, obviously none of us are going to get into a car and drive when, you know, when for a start we're so paranoid we're scared to even turn the key on. And you can get nausea and vomiting. Some people do. There is a contested thing called the hyperemesis of cannabinoid use, where some people just vomit and vomit and vomit. But, you know, some people say it exists, some people say it doesn't. Well, okay. But the wonderful thing about cannabis overdose or cannabis toxicity is that all you have to do is eat and sleep. And that's it. You know? Yeah, it can be pretty unpleasant, especially if you'd planned to do something else and you can't do it because you're too off your tit. But it definitely, as far as adverse effect profiles go, it's great, you know. And I think the answers from the audience, I'm going to have to write, I like that, happy, healthy, what was it, happy, healthy, hungry and horny. I reckon that's a Facebook meme in the making, isn't it? And speaking of Facebook memes, just for it to light up, well, it's a bit of black humour, really. My favourite, I must admit, was the picture of Cameron Dick. And this is the guy in Queensland. And the bubble said, well, if you don't like our cannabis legislation in Queensland, you could always move to Victoria and kill yourself. Yeah, I know. So it's not really funny, is it?
Really great guy, isn't he?
Oh, God, a dick.
Yeah.
Well named. Okay, I reckon I'm just about finished. People want to know what we can use it for. Well, basically, you know, you can try it for anything. It may not work for everything, but you can certainly try it. But of course, you know, the ailments it's best for is you look at the, just like with any herb, you look at the actions of that herb and what that herb can do. And with cannabis, you look at its actions and what it can do. And we know it can relieve pain. We know it's a brilliant anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. We know that it's neuroprotective. We know that it's nutritive, that it provides us with food and the omega oils necessary to keep our cell membranes healthy. We know that it has anticonvulsant effects. We know that it is antioxidant. We know that it's vulnerary. We can put it on skin and it will help it heal. And, of course, we know it has anti-cancer effects. So, and there's more. I mean, you know, so if you want to know what ailments it will help, then go by its actions. You know, if they're present in any of those ailments, then cannabis will help it. The interesting area, I think, is autoimmune disease, where the body turns around and attacks itself because, you know, why? Why have we got so much autoimmune disease now? It's not just how we diagnose and investigate. You know, there's got to be reasons why our bodies are all turning around and attacking themselves.
Vaccines.
No, not just, we'll let it later. I agree with you, vaccines are part of it, but it's not the whole answer, and we'll leave it there for now. But yeah, vaccines is definitely one cause, but I think it's our total environment, you know. If we go back to clean air and whole food, we're not going to have any of these problems. All these rates will start to decline rapidly.
It's all the chemical products we put in our food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so...
They're building bigger hospitals for children. Bigger hospitals.
Yeah, I know, because they've got to cope with the, you know, the 900% increase in autism since the 1990s. But yeah, anyway, we won't get into the anti-vax thing at the moment because there's a whole big thing out there for everyone to have a look at, and I'd advise you to. It's certainly a huge eye-opener. But cannabis, as far as autoimmune disease goes, basically because it's a balancer, it can help at the very least, as well as all the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, analgesic things, it can also help get the body back into balance. And that's where we think with fibromyalgia and migraine and stuff, it really helps. Oh, so the last thing, I completely forgot about the most basic thing of all, is everybody know about the endocannabinoid system?
No.
Who doesn't? Okay, so you've heard about other neurotransmitter systems. You've got dopamine, you've got endorphins and serotonin and all of those. Well, they all play their part in the central nervous system. But in the 1980s, they'd already discovered, what THC had done, and they found the natural cannabinoids, and they found the receptors that they attached to, and realised that it was a novel, unique, and neurotransmitter system. And just to put it really simply, because we're running out of time and I know we've got a lot to do, think of it as a graphic equaliser on your stereo. So you've got all your different neurotransmitters, like your dopamine and all of that. What the endocannabinoid system does is try to gently get them all down towards the middle. So it balances, it regulates. It is arguably the most important neurotransmitter system that we have, because it plays that huge regulatory and balancing role.
Amen to that.
Does that answer your question?
Well, that, yeah, Ubuntu.
Sorry?
Yeah, down in Ubuntu, we're on to that.
Okay, are you heckling, Belinda? I haven't been heckled yet. Okay, so, all right, we'll just do a final thing of questions, and I have lots of these papers here. We didn't even get onto all the different minor cannabinoids, but we can do that in another talk. So if anyone wants to have a look and just see, really it's just to give you an overview of the vast amount of research that's out there. That was just an hour's work printing out links from my phone. And it's already covered a dozen topics and stuff like that. So, any last questions?
You're done. That's it.
So, thank you.
I reckon she can hang around for half an hour or more.